Him, a narrative by Megan Oldham. Was I dreaming? Maybe I'm just imagining it. But maybe not. The ringing of my phone awoke me from my restless slumber. As I begrudgingly turned to my phone, the name that appeared was one that I was not expecting. It was a name that instantly shook me to my core and flooded my mind with memories that I had been trying to suppress for years. I needed to rub the sleep out of my eyes because I couldn't believe what I was seeing, hoping it was all a dream still. But the name didn't disappear. I knew something wasn't right, so with shaking hands, I clicked accept. You answered, he said with obvious confusion in his voice, yet there was a hint of anxiousness in his tone. He also added a slight laugh which felt like a wound being reopened after healing for a long time, painful, to say in the least. My mind was swirling as if I had gone on the teacup rides in an amusement park. Was this real? It was sophomore year of high school when I first met him. I was walking down the halls heading to my locker to get my history books for my next class. As I was standing there doing the combination, I glanced up and met my gaze with the most beautiful boy I had ever seen. It was as if time went into a slow motion. The way he walked was confident and relaxed. He was grinning slightly while looking down at his phone, his brilliant blue eyes shimmering under the lights. He was scanning the crowded hall when his gaze landed on mine. He stopped in his tracks. My breathing stopped. Was he actually looking at me? We both stood frozen for what felt like an eternity when he started walking towards me. My heart rate started to quicken in pace, and I looked in my locker for my books, hoping I was only imagining this boy. I shut my locker, and he was leaning against the neighboring locker, staring right through me. "Hey," he said in a smooth way that instantly made me melt. Hi," I said. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I just had to say that you were one of the most stunning girls I've ever met, and I just had to introduce myself." My breath got caught in my throat. Did he really just say that about me? After those few sentences, we continued to talk until the bell rang, but that was definitely not the last time I would talk to the blue-eyed boy. I finally managed to get over the initial shock and muttered, "What's up?" He breathed in a deep sigh, as if he was taking a breath of fresh air. He had something he was wanting to say, but was prolonging it by adding sighs and ums. The anticipation of what he was going to say made my stomach feel as if I had done the most intense roller coaster ever. "Can we FaceTime? I need to talk to you about something," he finally muttered. I knew it was an awful idea to do this, but I was so curious that I couldn't resist. "Yeah, sure," was all I could say back. As he hung up and called back, I hesitated, pressing the accept call button again because I wasn't sure how I was going to react when I saw those blue eyes that hurt me so bad before. His face popped up on the screen and he looked exactly as he did before, but with teary eyes and deep purple bags underneath them. "Hey, kid," he mustered out, sniffling slightly. That nickname caught me so off guard that I momentarily stopped breathing. He hadn't called me that since everything happened. On our 1-year anniversary, he told me he had a whole evening planned out and wouldn't tell me any details except to wear shoes that I could walk in. My first thought was he really taking me on a walk? But when he picked me up, he was grinning that goofy grin when he was up to no good. "Where are we going?" I whined into our 30-minute drive. "It's a surprise. Go back to singing, kid." He laughed and grabbed my hand. He intertwined his fingers, and it felt like getting a hug from someone you hadn't seen in a long time. After the hour drive, we arrived to a little park, and he gave me a wink. He grabbed my hand, and we started walking up this hill. It felt like we were hiking up the Empire State Building because of how tall and steep it was. When we reached the top, we saw the most beautiful landscape anyone could imagine. The tall trees covered in snow, a winding river that had been frozen due to the cold, and a brilliant auburn and magenta sky. He pulled me close and kissed me on the head, which was even better than the scene. We started our hike again, after standing there a few moments longer, when we spotted a little park bench in the distance. He started leading me towards this bench and brushed off the snow and patted the spot next to him. We were having a random conversation when I looked over and he was looking at me. It was this moment that I could tell that he was going to tell me something and that I could just admire him. His hair was being tousled around from the wind, and he had this expression of pure adoration and nervousness. He licked his lips and said, "I've been meaning to tell you something for a while now, and I hope you feel the same, but I think I'm completely in love with you." When he said this, my heart exploded into a million butterflies, and a laugh escaped my mouth. "I love you too." I jumped onto his lap and threw my arms around him, my true love. "What did you need to talk about?" Growing more anxious and annoyed that this is still going on. He shifted slightly and avoided eye contact for a solid minute. He kept running his hands along his pants, showing a sign that his hands were probably sweating. Why was he so nervous? He took another sigh and moved his gaze up towards the ceiling. At this point, it felt like my head was going to explode from all the thoughts running around inside. I just wanted to scream out, "Spit it out! Just say what you're thinking." But I remained silent. He looked back and a single tear rolled down his cheek. He finally said in a crackling voice, "So I know what happened between us didn't end on a good note, and I think you deserve a decent explanation as to why I—" And he didn't have to continue, because his voice got caught in his throat. I just nodded to let him know that I was listening. The evening before all this happened, we spent the usual time eating ice cream from the tub and laughing hysterically about God knows what. When I left that night, it ended like any other night with a hug and a kiss goodnight. The next day, I had not heard from him, which was already odd. At some point, the doorbell rang and I walked to the front door. He was standing there. His face was like looking into the face of a stranger. His eyes a dark shade of blue, unlike his crystal blue hue that normally shimmered. His facial expression showed of sorrow and a slight hint of anger, and his stance not welcoming or comforting like the way it had always been. It was almost uncomfortable. Something was not right. I let him in, and he went and sat at the edge of the couch. "I need to tell you something, so don't say anything until I'm done," he said without making eye contact. "I just can't do this anymore. I woke up this morning and I just don't love you anymore. It's over." I looked at him in utter shock, and it felt like I had been slapped across the face and my heart was being ripped out of my chest. I couldn't think of any words to say except one. "Why?" I muttered out. I didn't even recognize my own voice. This voice sounded like it belonged to someone who was weak and winded. "I don't know, but that's just how I feel. I'm sorry." Then he stood up from the couch and made his way over to the door. He brushed past me and stopped, holding the door handle. I couldn't turn to face him, but I knew he had finally turned to look at me when he said, "It was nothing you did. I just can't do this to you anymore. Thank you for being my first love." This was when I turned around, and his eyes, still the dark, unrecognizable shade, looked into my soul as I watched him walk out the door. "So like I said, it was nothing you did. I just thought, with all the changes that were coming up, that it wouldn't be fair to you. You were going to do bigger and better things while I was doing other things in my life. I didn't want to, and when I said I don't love you anymore, I didn't mean it," he said with tears spilling over his cheeks. "And I still love you and I just want you back." I didn't know what to say. This was the guy that I had cried over for months, maybe even years. Now here he is, making confessions that I definitely didn't think I was going to hear. My insides felt like they were being split in two. One part of me wanted to just fall back into his arms and take him back, but I knew I couldn't do that. At the end of the time of us being together, it felt like my sun, moon, and stars had disappeared. But I had to learn how to do all those things and be all those things for myself without him. I took a deep breath and looked at him. Those eyes that were so captivating were much dimmer and still filled with tears. "Thank you for telling me, but I can't let you hurt me again. You crushed me and I had to pick up all the pieces you broke. I learned how to love myself, and I'm not giving you that power to control my feelings anymore," I said in a steady voice. He stared at me blankly for a moment. His gaze shifted and he sighed. He looked at me and those blue eyes were begging for me. "But you were my first love." "Yes, but I'm done. I'm not carrying this pain you caused anymore. If I can move on, you can too." His face dropped, and he nodded sadly. Okay, goodbye. As I clicked the end button, I saw his face for the last time, but I was at peace with that. I laid back in bed and curled back into my soft comforter with a smile stretched across my face. It felt as though thousands of sandbags were taken off of my shoulders, and I knew that I could move past the idea of him. Finally.